happy to have Joseph Gerson with us this evening. He is the director of the Peace and Security Program of American Friends Service Committee. He's the chair of the No to War, No to NATO committee. He is the author of 4 books about the American global military presence and nuclear policy. The most recent one being Empire and the Bomb, How the U.S. Uses Nuclear Weapons to Dominate the World.
You'll recall the headlines of the last couple of months. Obama was considering ending the U.S. first strike nuclear doctrine, but then the Pentagon and Kerry and Carter said, no, you can't do that. So the United States continues to have its first strike doctrine. And this is not just abstract. I mean, since Nagasaki, the United States, during international crises and wars, has prepared and or threatened to initiate nuclear war at least 30 times. Remember that in the negotiations with Iran, all options were on the table. And when a nuclear power says all options are on the table, all options are on the table. So now we have missile defenses. Now, the United States long explained that our missile defenses in Europe were there to protect Europe against an attack from Iran. But then there was the nuclear deal with Iran, right? And that rationale disappeared. What the Russians had been afraid of is that, and the Chinese too, is that missile defenses are really part of a first strike doctrine. With the idea being that in your first strike, you wipe out most of the enemy's missiles and nuclear weapons. Some of them may survive. And then you have your missile defenses to take out the surviving enemy missiles. So the fear from Russia continues to be that we have a first strike doctrine directed against them. Okay, so then again, coming back to Mali, what's the alternative? And you know, when the Cold War ended, you know, the Reagan people were saying, you know, look, we outspent the Russians, and this is why we won the Cold War, right? The reality is rather more complex, right? Of course, we know that there were a whole lot of internal contradictions in the Soviet Union, and that was the biggest force that took them down. But the Cold War actually ended before the Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War ended in 1987 with the negotiation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, right? And those of you who were in the million-person march here on June 12, 1982, people who voted in the referendums across New England and across the country, we pushed Reagan to do the negotiations that he thought he would never do. And in the middle of this crisis, when again we're 5 minutes to midnight, you'll remember that Sweden had this wonderful prime minister, Olof Palme. He not only provided a kind of a moral beacon for us during the Vietnam War, but at the height of the crisis, he brought together leading figures from the Soviet Union, from Europe, from the United States, to talk about how we could back away from the spiraling arms race that threatened our survival. You know, I don't know that I would call it what continued after the collapse of the Soviet Union a continuation of the Cold War, except maybe in relationship to Korea, where those forces were there. But I've never really been able to quite lay out the grid here. But to understand that the United States, along with a number of other imperial powers, right, were contesting power for a long time. Colonialism, neocolonialism in the global South, China, which for the United States, we began building our overseas empire in 1898, right? But the vision was all the way back there in the 1850s. The vision in part was actually all the way back there to the debates in Philadelphia over what the Constitution would have. And so as I was observing the Cold War, it was like another layer on a complex, multi-level matrix of struggle. And so the Cold War was taking place still in the context of U.S. and European, and even to a degree Japanese imperialism. So when Russia collapses, well, then you have, if you will, this long-term continuity without the overlay, at least for 20 years or more, of certainly of communism or the Soviet Union involved. And I think what you have now is Russia, where, you know, going back to the Tsar and being, you know, a great power, they not only want to be concerned about, you know, the possible invasions from the West, but also, you know, deep in the Russian psyche is also the idea that they too are a great power. And I mean, one of the interesting pieces as I'm watching is, you know, in the context of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, you have Russia and China having increasing collaboration. But again, the reality is, if you look at Siberia, the question is 20, 40, 50 years from now, is that going to be Russian or is that going to be Chinese? You look at the migration, the economy, Vladivostok used to be Chinese. So it's going to be interesting.
I think I agree with your analysis, and I think that it's very important, and thank you. I think that your solutions are so timid and doesn't really have anything to do with building a movement. And my opinion is that young people now are really in motion. They understand a lot of this. We have to educate them. But I think that we really have to start talking about what the solutions are, and that is the end of nuclear weapons, the lowering of nuclear weapons, and the notion of a peace dividend, that all of the problems of the world can be solved with all this money. And I think that, again, I'm just repeating myself, but I think your presentation really lacked those two crucial elements of how we build a movement.
You know, one of the things I missed when I came in here were the young people, right? And I think one of the challenges for our movement, in which young people are increasingly focused on the one hand climate change, which immediately impacts their lives, and the economy, which immediately impacts their lives. And this is where their energy has been. And I think one of the challenges for our movement is to find ways in which we can help them understand that the issues that we're dealing with, including military spending, is part of the solution and what they need to work with. You know, I was focused on NATO tonight, but you know, the reality is that I'm deeply involved in work for the abolition of nuclear weapons. And just over a year ago, we had about 7,000 to 10,000 people here in the streets of New York marching on the UN at the time of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, demanding the abolition of nuclear weapons. One of the things that I know Brooklyn for Peace did on the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was to circulate a new petition, which has been launched by the surviving A-bomb sufferers. Their vision is not small. Their vision at this point is to get hundreds of millions of petition signatures over the next several years. There's a sense that with a thing called the Open-Ended Working Group and negotiations at the UN that are supposed to begin next year toward the abolition of nuclear weapons, we'll see what it really is, the idea of mobilizing hundreds of millions of petition signatures will reinforce the drive for nuclear weapons abolition. I'll also just make a pitch here, and I'll link up with Charlotte and others later, but around military spending. I mean, look, the reality is we're dealing with major powers. We're dealing with imperial power, and it doesn't blow away simply. So, you know, we press as hard as we can, right? So, I mean, one of the things that is on tax day here, you have the Global Day Against Military Spending. You have, and one thing people here can join in on, the Progressive Congressional Caucus has a thing called the People's Budget. It doesn't deal with the military as much as we'd like, but it does deal with at least some cuts there. One of the challenges is to get all the members of the Progressive Caucus to vote for their own bill. But this is one way that we can move forward. And then the other thing I'll say on the connection of the two, you know, with the United States preparing to spend $1 trillion on that new generation nuclear weapons, I mean, this is where it hits, right? This is the intersection. And so this clearly is where we need to be finding lots and lots of ways to be pushing. And again, we don't get all that we want in this context, but within the elite, even within the Pentagon, there's questions about how much should be spent and whether this spending is going to sink their ability to dominate the rest of the world with conventional weapons. But this, I think the $1 trillion triad is a major opening for us to be pushing on. So the question, for those who couldn't hear it, is about the North Korean nuclear test. you know, clearly the North Korean government is not one that most of us would want to celebrate or live under. But again, you know, I'm not much of a biblical scholar, but I know in the Bible it says something about removing the mote in your eye before pointing out somebody else's. And to appreciate that back in the Korean War, I'm just thinking here in terms of historical memory, the United States destroyed something like 95 to 98% of all standing buildings in North Korea. So they have this historical memory. They also have the historical memory of the United States both during the Korean War and after, preparing and threatening to initiate nuclear war against North Korea at least 9 times. So in this circumstance, it's not a surprise that they would try to develop a weapon that, from their perspective, would deter the United States. The other piece here, 2 pieces. You know, I'm not often very kind in my remarks to either Bill Clinton or Secretary of State Albright. Remember, Albright said that the death of 500,000 children in Iraq was worth the price. But at the end of the Clinton administration, Albright, following on Perry, in negotiations with the North Koreans, negotiated a comprehensive agreement that would have resolved the U.S. and Korean crisis. And again, part of the problem here is we never really ended the Korean War. This armistice was not a peace agreement. And Bill was supposed to go to Korea just after the November elections to finalize that agreement. But in the midst of the stolen election and the crisis here in the United States, he concluded that he couldn't go. And so the agreement was not finalized under Clinton. W. Bush comes to power, Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, and Powell is indicating to the South Koreans, and they had a progressive Prime Minister, Kim Dae-jung, had led the democracy movement in South Korea, and had a thing called the Sunshine Policy, trying to negotiate a soft landing for North Korea. And so Kim Dae-jung was the first foreign leader to meet with W. Bush. Powell had sent the message that there was going to be continuity in U.S. policy from the Albright negotiations. But when Kim Dae-jung got here, he was told that the Sunshine Policy no longer prevailed, that they were not going to pursue the negotiations with North Korea. And just to add an extra dollop, Bush referred to the North Korean leader as a pigby, later a part of the axis of evil. So it was sunk there. You had some sporadic negotiations that were not fulfilled during the W. Bush presidency, and then Obama comes to power. The Obama administration, this is one of the failures of the Obama administration. The policy has been so-called strategic patience. The hope and expectation of the U.S. elite has been that North Korea would collapse, and then we wouldn't have to worry about it. Well, president after president has hoped this, and North Korea still is there. In this circumstance, North Korea has continued to develop what it perceives as its deterrent arsenal. And this is going to impact very negatively on the campaign to get rid of nuclear weapons, right? So as the United States has boycotted the humanitarian consequences process, it boycotted the open-ended working group. The reality is that most of the world's nations are pressing for the abolition of nuclear weapons. You go to the UN and you watch the debate there and you see the nuclear powers are isolated. But the reality in the current moment is going to be all this pressure. The United States is going to say, what are you thinking? North Korea is building missiles that can hit the United States with nuclear weapons. So I think it points to the fact that we can't deal with issues in siloed manners, right? We have to look at the complexities of them and to understand that things are related and they push one another.
I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to ask a question, and it's about the interlinking of issues. I was really struck with your list of NATO members and then NATO partners. I'm not sure exactly what that means. A Mediterranean dialogue, bringing in Japan and Korea. Is the U.S. trying to mobilize NATO as part of a pivot to Asia and containment of China, a sort of military alliance to go along with something like the TTP? I was just struck by the expansiveness. I mean, I thought I knew about NATO, and I learned a lot there.
That's right.
And NATO partners included Russia. That's right.
Yeah, there was, it was on the list, and again, in the immediate aftermath, in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, there was some vision of building a common house in Europe. And there was some hope, especially as we had Yeltsin to play with, that we could kind of integrate them on our own terms. So you have a partner relationship. They could sit in the back of meetings and observe and maybe negotiate around the side if they wanted. So you had that. You look at the question of intelligence sharing. You look at co-production of weapons. You look at alliances in relationship to China, and you have this integration. You have elites that perceive that they have common interests, and they find ways of working together. I want to take this moment to again shatter another image here. We think of Japan as a country that is peaceful, doesn't have a military, learned its lessons from its imperialism. The current Prime Minister of Japan is the grandson of a man charged as a Class A war criminal and has wanted throughout his career to undo the post-war system, including the Peace Constitution and Article 9. They have assaulted the education system in Japan, growing nationalism. They are the 6th biggest military spender in the world. The current Prime Minister has now won a 2/3 majority in the Diet, their parliament, and is working to reverse the Article 9, to revise the Constitution. And worse, his party has an alternative constitution that they've been wanting to put in place, which returns to an emperor-centric environment and a place where human rights barely exist, turning the clock back. Whether they'll be able to do that is another question. That's the vision. You also have this kind of, the right wing there to kind of push it. Several years ago, created a crisis over these uninhabited rocks and really sparked the competition with China. And recently the talk by one of the previous principal authors of U.S. Asia policy, who said that the dangers of a U.S.-China war are greater growing out of East China Sea between Japan and China than they are in the South China Sea. So again, but we've got one of the pictures I had that I didn't show you is the theater high altitude missile defenses that are being put in Korea, being put in Japan, and it's this deepening integration of these systems, and it's the same kind of systems that they're using in Europe. Let me respond in a couple of ways. On the one hand, I agree with you. And my sense is that popular movements make broad forces, right? And unless there's an overthrow of government, what you're going to get is a modification of policy, right? More or less at a given time. So on the one hand, yes, we need to name what it is that we want, which is peace, justice, environmental sustainability, reversal of climate change. We want all those things. Our demands have to be strong, and frankly, we have to be willing to get arrested and to take commitment and really put our life energy behind those demands. At the same time, holding contradictions together here, as with the freeze. We had a debate in 1979 in my office as to whether or not we should support the nuclear weapons freeze because it was an abolition. But our thought was, it's at least a step that will help us survive. So I'd like us to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
You made a comment that young people aren't really interested in this kind of issue. They're concerned with climate change and a couple of other things.
Yes.
And I wonder if you're familiar with the platform of the Movement for Black Lives,
Yes.
which goes very deeply into these issues
That's right.
and calls for eliminating all U.S. bases in all over the world, slashing the military budget by 50%. Eliminating nuclear arms and so on, and using all of that as ways of providing funds for all the social needs that we have in this country, domestically. And so I think that would kind of contradict, I think our demands have to be kind of in line with those demands, because otherwise it will just be left.
Right. I would also just point to Palestinian human rights and BDS, which is one place where there is quite a bit of youth movement. I'll just say that in Boston, we're in the process now of planning a post-election conference to help frame issues and mobilize. And an invitation is out to the 3 women who initiated Black Lives Matter to be keynote speakers. So we recognize this. One of the challenges, of course, is to go from the written paper by leaders into what are the, what moves people. And clearly in a situation where black people can't walk down the street, not only black people, brown people too, can't walk down the street without being afraid of getting killed, beaten by the police, sent to prison. I mean, all of these are, can't get jobs. And these are all immediate survival needs, right? And so how we build those links to that movement, we need to be working, we need to be with them, and through the discourse, including about military spending, finding ways in which we can work together. And, you have to move from the leaders to the people. What's one step we can take? I mean, the U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia, right, that's the source of so much of this, right? And just to say, quite a number of years ago, one of the members of our committee wanted me to talk to a lobbyist for independent Kashmir in Washington. And so I was in Washington, I used to have coffee with this guy. And he's telling me about all the money the Saudis are putting in and building all these mosques, right? Well, right now there's a major bill in Congress to halt the arms sales to Saudi Arabia, right? We need to be calling members of Congress and say cut it off. And I think we need to remember that it's not our oil under their sand. And I think articulation of a non-imperial policy in relation will begin to move us in the direction we want to go. I don't see a role for NATO, except as we do need to look after basic security within our countries. But the reality is that the drone attacks have just created more and more enemies, and it's not a winning solution. Violence creates more violence.
I have a very short comment and then a slightly more complicated question. My short comment is I'm a professor of American foreign policy, and I think it's fair to say that 90% of the students in my university don't know what NATO is. And that may be that, we're not Harvard, but on the other hand, I think that that's not unrepresented. And I'm putting that out because I think somehow that reality needs to figure in this discussion. So that's my trivial one. At a deeper level, you can hear people in this room all struggling for how do we formulate this issue. Like, no one likes NATO, no one wants this nuclear competition, but like, how do we talk about it? What do we do? And I think also that there's probably many people in this room, including myself, who in one way or another have been involved in anti-nuclear weapons things, maybe since we were like in the womb, right? But I'm listening to you speak, and I'm thinking, what are really the times where you've had mass movements around nuclear weapons, right? And I think that there's, it's not just, people got together. It happened in the late 50s and early 60s when people became very concerned because all of the scientific stuff about the radioactivity and the fallout of strontium-90, and there was an immediate sense of alarm. They're poisoning our milk, not the milk of people in Korea, our milk. And so that was very frightening. And if you look at the second growth of the anti-nuclear stuff, it was in the Reagan era. And it wasn't an abstraction about nuclear weapons, it's because he was crazy. People thought he was crazy. The Soviet Union was very strong. The way he was speaking and the weapons he was building in the early part of his administration made it seem like there was going to be a nuclear war. And so when people got into it, it was because they felt like these idiots are going to blow up the world, they have to do something. And even here in Brooklyn, what made Brooklyn for Peace grow is because they were going to put nuclear-capable missiles in Staten Island. And that's really nuts. So, those are things that people really responded to. And if I'm listening to you speak, and I agree with everything you're saying, I can't imagine NATO, or any of this generating that kind of excitement. And I'm not saying that to be a down, but I'm thinking, how do we organize? I don't think that we can go to those last experiences like the Euro missile fight. I don't think we're in that anymore. So that's my little question.
So,
I wanted to
I don't have, I mean, I've been struggling with this too, believe me. And you know, where I look, there was the slide there on the military exercises. There was the Brookings report, right? There is Perry. So we're in a situation where the danger is, you know, the Bulletin Atomic Scientist is telling us we're 3 minutes to midnight. I mean, how much closer do you want to get? How we are able to turn this kind of fear, recognizing that NATO is one of the driving forces of it, not the only one. I mean, that's part of the challenge to us. I don't know that I have the answer to it. The trillion, one handle of educating around the $1 trillion triad that touches people's lives is one way. I don't know that I have the answer, but you know, we have to think together. I mean, back when we had the freeze, we had, you know, there was this Boston study group, right, at MIT, and out of the discussions, Randy Forsberg came up with the concept of the nuclear weapons freeze, right, and that gave us a platform that people perceived was a fair answer to save the planet. And I think one of the challenges for us is to be able to come up with that, a kind of framing that's equal to that, to move us forward.